The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, two quick notes before we jump in today. One, yesterday we erroneously put up a graphic on screen citing that Montenegro has nuclear weapons. I don't even know where that came from, but that was wrong, and I apologize, and I stand corrected. Also, I will be doing a live stream on our YouTube channel this evening with analysis of Donald Trump's State of the Union address, which we can all watch together, so I hope you'll join me then. Okay, we're going to talk about Venezuela again. And as a sort of reminder, there is sort of limited upside to me talking about Venezuela because every time I do, it angers people. It causes people to unsubscribe their paid memberships. It's actually sort of bad in a sense for me to talk about Venezuela, but I think it's important for me to keep doing it, so I'm going to. And yesterday we did one story about a major military defection in Venezuela from the Maduro regime. We did another story yesterday pointing out that there are some problems with the perspective that some on the American left the positions that some on the American left are taking with regard to Venezuela. And the reaction was probably like 15%, hey, thanks for doing this. The left is getting some things wrong. 30% left-wingers saying, I'm just a neoconservative shill. 30% right-wingers saying I am a left-wing shill for socialism, which was a weird response. And the other 25% of the responses were sort of like indirect, just insults about me or, you know, general anti-Semitism, that type of thing. So there's not like major upside to this. And there are some really bad talking points floating around. And I just feel as though I'm doing a disservice to everybody in the audience if I don't talk about them and explain the way that I see the situation. Now, there are those who are writing in saying, David, you're clearly just in the tank and you're benefiting from attacking Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. That's ridiculous. I have no connection to Venezuela or Nicolas Maduro. We're not funded by anyone where saying that I am for or against the Maduro regime would be beneficial or detrimental in any way. I mean, the sort of financial angle is very, very silly. If that's your argument, though, consider for a second that a lot of the coverage people are sending me that they say is spot on about Venezuela is either Venezuelan-funded state media or Russian state media. Russia, of course, being a direct supporter of the regime. If anyone should be questioning financial ties related to coverage, it's not me here who's funded just by my audience. It's them. So let's give that talking point a rest. Then I heard from others that my anti-Maduro views are because I am from Argentina, but specifically from Argentina's elite, which is, of course, wrong. I mean, my family left Argentina in 1989 with almost literally nothing because we weren't part of the elite. My family, who still lives there, sort of split about Venezuela and Nicolas Maduro. That's not a very good argument either. So I'm going to examine everything that we are hearing solely on the basis of my opinion. It's not influenced by finances or anything else of the sort, and I invite anybody who thinks it is to point to some evidence. So let's get into a talking point that is spreading about Venezuela, which is just wrong, okay? The talking point is that whatever is going on in Venezuela that's bad, it's because of U.S. sanctions, either significantly because of U.S. sanctions or mostly or fully because of U.S. sanctions. That is the cause of Venezuela's economic issues. We destroyed their economy, and now we want to take over their oil and install a new leader. So let's break it down. At a general level, Venezuela's poverty was not caused by the United States, and the opposition in Venezuela cannot have been concocted solely by the CIA or neocons or whoever else. Does the United States have interests in Latin America? Of course. I'm against American intervention in Latin America. I'm against neoconservative regime change plans. I'm a progressive, so I'm against all of that stuff. But if there were no significant actual opposition and many other problems in Venezuela, you wouldn't have the situation that you have today. So let's now focus in on the sanctions piece. This is a talking point that's on repeat right now. American sanctions ruined Venezuela. It's simply not true, okay? Number one, the sanctions on Venezuela are mostly very recent. Sam Cedar actually had a guest on the Majority Report recently, a very interesting interview where the guest pointed out the economic problems started way before sanctions were ever placed on Venezuela. And I have a clip here for you where Ken Livingstone, who's a British politician who was mayor of London for a while, he's on the was on the Greater London Council. He went on BBC This Week and started saying, oh, sanctions are to blame. And Andrew Neil asked a very precise question, a very specific question. Explain which sanctions. Tell me which sanctions. And of course, Ken Livingstone couldn't name them. This is painful to watch, but it's important. Let's take a look.
Well, if all that's true, it will be appalling. But what I've watched is America's imposed sanctions. Those sanctions mean that the oil corporation that Chavez imposed when he nationalised it is losing £11 billion a year. Now, that's an appalling impact on their economy.
When were the US oil sanctions imposed?
I can't remember when it started.
Well, I'll tell you when.
All right, good.
They were imposed this week.
No, that was the latest.
No, until then, there have been no oil sanctions on Venezuela.
Okay, and it continues, and it doesn't get any better. Take a look.
There have been sanctions on Venezuela, just like there have been on Cuba.
What else were there?
Like there are on Nicaragua, like there are on Iran. And these are illegal under international law.
Tell me what... So the Venezuelan economy has shrunk by 50% in 5 years. What US sanctions caused that?
Well, in the first place, there was the collapse of the oil price. That was damaging.
That's not a sanction.
But American sanctions then did damage. I don't know. I've been retired pensioner. I haven't got staff.
No, you've been saying... No, excuse, this is quite important because as we speak tonight, children in Venezuela are starving to death. So you say it's
sanctions. They wouldn't be starving to death.
Well, which sanctions?
They've had sanctions for years. They have. And
I'm sorry.
I know that because that's what the Venezuelan ambassador told me.
Well, he may tell you that, but but let me tell you, the first sanctions were introduced in 2015 by President Obama.
So this goes on for minutes more. I won't play all of it. You can find the entire thing online. This is information we can find, right? The United States does many bad things. We don't need to defend the United States, but we can't be making allegations that aren't true. There's no question that the U.S. has been messing around in Venezuela since the Perez Jimenez regime of the mid-50s. And this, as is often the case, that was to fight so-called communism. That's undeniable. But if you want to blame sanctions for the situation today, what do you mean? Because in 2005, Bush designated Venezuela as ignoring counter-narcotics rules and then immediately waived the economic sanctions that would normally go along with that. In 2006, the U.S. was still Venezuela's most important trading partner. Trade grew by something like 35%. In 2006, the U.S. banned the sale of weapons and defense services to Venezuela, but those aren't economic sanctions. We just can't sell them weapons. In 2014, the House finally passed some economic sanctions, but they were only on individual Venezuelan officials involved in mistreating protesters. And you can't argue that freezing the assets of some Venezuelan officials took down their economy. So again, examine the talking points. Am I for involvement in Venezuela by the United States? No. Am I for installing a neocon puppet leader in Latin America? No. Do I believe that the purported interim president, Juan Guaido, is an angel without being worthy of criticism? Of course not. Am I for raiding countries for oil? No, I'm not. Am I financially connected to any of this stuff? If anything, I'm incentivized not to talk about this because every time I do, I lose subscribers. But this is the reality. And I pointed out yesterday that American oil companies are pretty damn happy with the arrangement. Even if John Bolton says we want oil, that's horrible. But the oil companies aren't exactly in line with that right now. They're actually pretty happy with the status quo. And the idea that it is sanctions that brought down Venezuela is factually indefensible. Okay, we are learning more and more about this sort of hydra, three-headed beast of criminality that is Donald Trump. There's the personal life, the business life, and the political life. The political life has its own sort of three-headed beast of criminality, which is the campaign, the administration, and increasingly the inauguration. We have now heard from a report in the New York Times and others that federal prosecutors have ordered Donald Trump's inaugural committee to turn over a whole bunch of documents to them, including about donors, finances, activities. And the reason that we're seeing growing interest in the inauguration is that there are a whole bunch of different possible crimes that were committed surrounding the inauguration. This is separate from everything else that's going on, okay? Did foreigners illegally donate to Trump's inauguration? That would be a crime. Did people in Trump's inauguration team knowingly accept donations from foreigners? That would be a crime. Was money laundered through vendor payments and contributions of the inauguration? That would be a crime. Did members of the inaugural committee make false statements to the Federal Elections Committee about this, Federal Elections Commission? That would be a crime. Were donor names omitted from a previous list that was submitted? That would be a crime. This is all very early. It's just the first step. No one is yet specifically accused of wrongdoing, but this all has been surfacing in part from that Michael Cohen probe, possibly from the documents that were seized at Cohen's hotel room or his office or his apartment. And every element that either Southern District of New York prosecutors or Robert Mueller touch is becoming a subject of investigation. Remember, Trump's relationships with banks, including Deutsche Bank, the inauguration itself, payoffs to mistresses, meetings with Russians, golf clubs employing undocumented immigrants, the Scotland Golf Club and possible criminality there. It's almost endless. And what is really important to understand about this is that this is not just Mueller at this point. A lot of what is now taking place at the highest levels in terms of possible criminality is the Southern District of New York. Okay, I mean, why do we care about that? The reason we care about that is that it dispels the notion that what we are seeing here is a vendetta by one guy, a Republican, by the way, Robert Mueller, who simply is against Trump and wants to bring Trump down. It's it would be completely inaccurate to say that it would even be possible for Robert Mueller to carry this out unilaterally. But much of what is now being investigated is running through the Southern District of New York prosecutors. And what we're learning every single week, it seems, is that Donald Trump has been operating on the fringes of and actually outside of the law for years. And he chose to run for president. It's really not the brightest idea. And what this gets me back to is what I've been saying for years at this point. Trump ran for publicity. Trump didn't run because he really thought he would become president. He wanted to place a respectable second or third in the Republican primary, get paid more for The Apprentice or whatever else. It would not be, and it's not proving to have been a particularly wise move, to have operated your entire business life on the fringes of the law and then to become the Republican nominee and ultimately president, because now everything that you've done, everything that he has done is under the microscope, and the inauguration increasingly now part of that possible criminality. Which area do you think is rife with the most criminality? Is it the inauguration or is it something else? Let me know on Twitter, where you can find me at dpakman, and make sure you follow the show as well at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Big thank you to Jonathan Abramson, who's today's new member of the day, and also Caleb Hayashi, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Dangerously close to 5 years of membership for Caleb. Jonathan and Caleb, thank you. Join them, support the program, whether you listen, watch, read transcripts, whatever, at www.joinpakman.com. 40% off coupon is still valid. This is 2020. This is 2020 will save you 40% off of the membership of your choice. Okay, we've been covering Donald Trump and immigration basically since before he was even Republican nominee, the infamous, they're not sending their best, they're sending criminals and rapists, and some I am sure are good people comment. And part of the absurdity of Donald Trump's positions on undocumented immigration are that he himself is a perpetrator of the actual problem around undocumented immigration, which is that companies hire undocumented immigrants and don't suffer the consequences. Even though, strictly speaking, it is against the law, it is very, very easy for the punishment to be levied only on the undocumented immigrant via deportation and not on the company doing the hiring. And I pointed out from the beginning, if you're really going to deal with this issue in a serious manner, before you even talk about a wall and what the wall should be made of, you have to start holding accountable the companies that are hiring undocumented immigrants. We now have a new revelation that not one, not two, but three of Donald Trump's golf clubs have fired undocumented immigrant employees, which they had been employing in some cases for many, many years. This latest news is about Trump National Golf Club Philadelphia, which is in New Jersey. It's called Trump National Golf Club Philadelphia, but it's not in Philadelphia or even in Pennsylvania. It's in New Jersey. This is the third property to fire undocumented workers. We previously had a New York Times report on employees at the Bedminster, New Jersey club. 12 undocumented immigrants were fired there since that report. We've learned about dozens of workers at Trump National Golf Club in Westchester in New York, where dozens of employees, undocumented employees, were fired. And we now have learned that at least 5 workers were either fired or told never to come to work again at Trump Golf Club Philadelphia in New Jersey. And there's every expectation that there's going to be many, many more. So the picture that is very quickly being created, accurately, I would add, is the massive hypocrisy of Donald Trump on this issue. We have not only the fact that while he wants to build a wall and claims to be tough on undocumented immigration, he has said nothing about going after the companies doing the hiring of undocumented immigrants, but has himself been a longtime employer of undocumented immigrants, not only at his clubs, but also even in construction projects, real estate construction projects that he has done in New York City and in other cities. We learned that Donald Trump's wife, Melania, worked illegally here in the United States, which Donald Trump claims to want to deport people for. Melania Trump was initially here in the U.S. On a visa that did not allow her to do any work, and she did work, which goes against the visa. That's something Donald Trump says he wants people deported for doing. And then, of course, Donald Trump wants to get rid of all sorts of paths to citizenship, not only birthright citizenship, but also something called chain migration. And of course, Melania Trump's own parents have become citizens via chain migration, which Donald Trump is against. Now, the defense here for Trump's persistent employment of undocumented immigrants has been, well, listen, no one knew that they were undocumented. Trump definitely didn't know. Even Trump's managers were duped by these fake documents that the employees presented. And now we've fired everybody. The problem, of course, is that a report a couple of weeks ago exposed that it was Donald Trump's businesses that were providing the forged documents to many of these employees. So that's not believable. And we've only recently gotten comment on this third club that was employing undocumented immigrants from Eric Trump, who simply called it heartbreaking, which is sort of weird. Like, which aspect of it exactly is it that's heartbreaking from Eric Trump's point of view? Consider the double standard. Consider the double standard when you think back to, put aside for a second the no consequences for the corporations. Back in 1993, President Bill Clinton nominated Zoe Baird for Attorney General. It was revealed that Zoe Baird's husband had once employed an undocumented immigrant nanny and an undocumented immigrant chauffeur. Okay, Bill Clinton's AG nominee's husband previously had done that. Within 8 days, Zoe Baird was forced into retracting her nomination for Attorney General. Donald Trump has employed dozens of undocumented immigrants at multiple businesses. No consequences for the company. Obviously, no consequences for Trump. And he still is touting himself as the guy who's strong on undocumented immigration. People just shrug. His supporters don't care, or they excuse it. Things have changed radically from 1993, and they've changed radically even from 3 years ago when President Obama was president of the U.S. We have even more 2020 Democratic candidates to talk about. The field is getting very, very full. Senator Cory Booker is now running. South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg is running. We already had Julian Castro and John Delaney and Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, even pseudoscience woo lady who I've interviewed before, Marianne Williamson, is running, even though she obviously has no shot. Richard Ojeda was running, although he has already ended his campaign after not getting any traction. I am now ready to eliminate a couple of people from the candidates I will consider. Reminder, I already told you last week, I am not supporting Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris softened instantly on the issue of Medicare for all. I know that there are people in the audience who are more concerned about Kamala Harris's criminal justice record as Attorney General of California. That is concerning, but she did this insta-flip on Medicare for all after last week's town hall. And as I mentioned last week, she's negotiating against herself and random conservatives who slammed her for saying she's all in on Medicare for all, period. Her staff ended up putting out a statement saying, well, she wants Medicare for all. She's open to all options. So she's doing exactly what I predicted many candidates would ultimately do, which is pay lip service to Medicare for all, but ultimately back off of it. Remember, the Democratic Party platform is not Medicare for all. It's expanding the Medicare opt-in down to 55 and having a public option as part of the for-profit healthcare system. So Kamala Harris is out as far as I'm concerned. Tulsi Gabbard was all but crossed off my list when she announced, and I did a long piece about it, her foreign policy views are concerning, whole litany of issues with Tulsi Gabbard. But now I'm ready to cross her off of my list as well. Her entire video explaining her awakening on LGBT issues just did not ring particularly genuine to me. But what actually pushed me over the edge with Tulsi Gabbard is that I'm just sick of her posturing on war and military action. I've been looking in more detail at all of her statements and positions, and her foreign policy strikes me as just a sort of pretzel of broken logic. I don't know if that metaphor makes sense, but her foreign policy doesn't really make sense to me. On the one hand, she pitches herself as anti-war. She's against interventionist regimes. Okay, that's a good start in many senses. But then the problem is that she calls herself a hawk when it comes to counterterrorism, including using drones and deployment of special ops in countries that aren't even at war with the United States, which to me is a way to play coy with being anti-war while actually favoring a ton of hawkish policy that I'm against. But then at the same time, to sort of flip again on this issue, she is sometimes totally anti-interventionist to a fault, like, for example, defending Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad as merely a victim of American aggression and bullying and someone who should just be left alone. She's actually even defended the Russian policy of bombing people to help Bashar al-Assad. She wants the United States staying out where we don't belong, but she has this relationship with and supports Indian Prime Minister Modi, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, both of whom are just hard right on foreign policy. So I find Tulsi Gabbard to be a fraud on foreign policy. I have no real interest in even continuing to criticize her. She's just not in the running for my support at this point in time. And I want to be super clear on this. It's not just one position of hers. It's the totality of her actions and positions versus her rhetoric and self-framing of what her views are. It's just not for me. And I know that every time I talk about this, much like Venezuela, I get some angry emails from people who say, David, you're just way off. Check out this or that commentator. They know the truth about Tulsi Gabbard, and we should all be supporting her. She's the only candidate that we should even be considering on the left or Democrat. It's not for me, okay? It's just, it's not my thing. I've told you why. You can disagree with me, but I'm being completely transparent about why I won't be supporting Tulsi Gabbard. Cory Booker, I am skeptical of, as I've said before, but I am still investigating his broader views. So for me right now, Elizabeth Warren is near the top of my list. Andrew Yang is near the top of my list, and I'm waiting to see who else gets involved. Will Bernie run? We still don't know. But Harris and Gabbard are pretty close to the bottom of my list. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you on the 2020 Democratic primary? Only on the basis of the candidates that have actually announced that they're running. Let me know. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. Follow me there. Follow the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We have a fantastic long-form deep dive for you today on conspiracy theories, and what makes this extra special is that it's a crossover episode with Natan's Notes, the relatively new YouTube channel headed up by former TV director on the David Pakman Show and my little brother, Natan Pakman. He is voicing over and walking us through conspiracy theories and conspiratorial thinking on today's deep dive. Let's get right into it.
How do conspiracy theories work? Conspiracy theories and conspiratorial thinking are around us all the time, from eccentric friends who question whether we landed on the moon, to the fact that a majority of Americans believe that Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't the only person involved in the JFK assassination. Let's take a look at how conspiracy theories work. Before we begin, we should clarify the difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy. A conspiracy is a fact about the world, a situation for which there's good evidence that two or more people worked together, conspired, to commit an illegal or immoral act. A conspiracy theory, on the other hand, is an allegation or claim that an event was caused by a conspiracy. A conspiracy is something that's known as a result of investigating the causes of an event. A conspiracy theory, on the other hand, is the result of rejecting the evidence that explains an event. Actual conspiracies include the plot of Roman senators to assassinate Julius Caesar, the 1953 Iranian coup that overthrew the democratically elected prime minister, orchestrated by the US and the UK, the Watergate break-in, and any time two or more people get together to rob a bank. Let's look at 5 common characteristics of conspiracy theories. First, the presupposition that nothing ever happens by accident, that chaos or randomness does not and cannot explain significant world and historical events. Most conspiracy theorists would accept that any one of us could get hit by a car while crossing a street due to completely accidental or random causes, like the driver having the sun in their eyes for 3 straight seconds right as you cross the street in front of him. But the conspiratorial worldview is that events of major significance, at least significance to humans, never occur this way. More on why this is later. Second, the idea of a small group of people in power pulling the puppet strings behind the scenes. A good example of this, I think, is the old anti-Semitic canard of Jewish control. The core here is that there's a cabal of Jews controlling events in secret for their own benefit. So it's been said that Jews controlled the media, the Federal Reserve, Wall Street, Hollywood, that they were behind historical wars and revolutions, and even that they seek world domination. The most influential expression of these ideas is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The text was a hoax plagiarized from earlier sources, first published in Russia in 1903 and purported to be the minutes of a meeting of Jewish leaders at the end of the 19th century conspiring together to take over the world. It's been debunked many times, but its popularity and influence continues to be significant. Henry Ford funded the printing of 500,000 copies that were distributed in the US in the 1920s, and it was cited in Hitler's Mein Kampf and in Nazi propaganda. More recently, it was referenced in Hamas's charter and continues to be read in multiple languages. And this is a feature of most conspiracy theories, that a small and powerful group, supposedly the Jews in this particular case, have orchestrated a big, nefarious scheme behind closed doors. A third common trait of conspiracy theories is that official stories are considered to be propaganda used by those in power to brainwash most of the general public. Think about, for example, the Warren Commission report, an 888-page document submitted to President Lyndon Johnson in September 1964, concluding that Lee Harvey Oswald acted entirely alone in the assassination of JFK. Attacking the Warren Commission and its report is a key feature of JFK assassination conspiracy theories. One of the main points is the single bullet theory, often ridiculed and called the, quote, magic bullet theory, which the report used to explain how one of the 3 bullets fired by Oswald hit Kennedy's neck and Texas Governor John Connally's chest, wrist, and thigh. The supposed implausibility of the same bullet behaving this way is commonly cited and was even the focus of a key scene in Oliver Stone's JFK, and a parody scene in an episode of Seinfeld. Now, to any of you wondering whether only magic could explain what this bullet did, it's been modeled and analyzed many times and found to be completely consistent with the laws of physics. Fourth, skepticism. Now, this is actually pretty interesting. Conspiracy theories often appeal to our usual sense of skepticism, but take it to an irrational extreme. They take advantage of the fact that it's easy to sow doubt in us simply by asking questions that appear to expose inconsistencies in official accounts of events. Consider NASA's footage of the Apollo 11 moon landing. Conspiracists love to point out the appearance of a waving American flag as the pole is being fixed into position by the astronauts. They say, there's no wind on the moon, so how could the flag possibly wave? Now, this is a perfectly reasonable question, and of course, there's also a perfectly reasonable answer. While the astronauts placed the flag on the ground, it vibrated the flagpole and flag, and the inertia in the vacuum of space led to some movement of the flag that looked to us like waving. Also, the astronauts accidentally bent the horizontal rods holding the flag in place several times, which created the appearance of a rippling flag in the still photographs. Lastly, and very importantly, is the unfalsifiability of conspiracy theories. If you disprove any specific point or argument made by conspiracy theorists, they either claim that your, quote, evidence is fake and/or part of the official propaganda story, or they accept it and immediately move on to the next point. So to take the moon landing example, if you explain why the flag appeared to be waving, a conspiracist might say, yeah, sure, but what about the fact that there's no blast crater when the lunar module landed? Or if you point to an aspect of the photos that disproves their point, they answer, those images were doctored by NASA. In this way, confirmation bias causes conspiracy theorists to take any evidence you throw at them, any evidence they encounter, even evidence which contradicts their theories, and incorporate it as further proof of their conclusion. So why is it that some people buy into conspiracy theories? We live in a world that is in many ways full of complexity and chaos. Terrible things happen for no good reason, scientific explanations can seem completely counterintuitive, and an event that changes history can occur by complete accident. It's difficult for a lot of people to accept that a lot of what happens in the world is by coincidence or through causes outside of our control. Some of these people turn to conspiracy theories because they provide reassurance that what's happening in their lives or the things that we see on the news have identifiable and comprehensible causes. There's been a lot of research, especially over the past 15 years, aimed at understanding the psychology of those who believe in conspiracy theories. Conspiratorial belief, it turns out, correlates with certain personality traits such as intellectual curiosity, a strong imagination, cynicism toward politics, and distrust of authority. Psychological studies have found that belief in conspiracy theories also tends to correlate with belief in creationism, the paranormal, superstitions, and New Age beliefs. Conspiracism has also been tied to a tendency to see patterns where there are none. A 2018 study by psychologist Joshua Hart gave cognitive tests to over 1,200 American adults and also asked them questions about what they thought about statements like, quote, the power held by heads of state is second to that of small unknown groups who really control world politics, and, quote, groups of scientists manipulate, fabricate, or suppress evidence in order to deceive the public. Those who agreed with the conspiratorial statements were much more likely to identify non-existent patterns when shown randomized visual images, and they were more likely to interpret nonsensical statements as profound. So on portions of the test that had nothing to do with politics or conspiracies, the conspiracists tended to attribute meaning and intention where non-conspiracists did not. Some researchers have also suggested that conspiratorial thinkers suffer from what's known as proportionality bias. In other words, when someone has trouble believing that an event with large-scale consequences can have a small-scale cause. For example, that a lone gunman would assassinate JFK, that someone as famous as Princess Diana could have been killed by a simple car accident, or that a mere group of 19 terrorists could create the devastation of 9/11. Assuming that these were all high-level government conspiracies would maintain the proportionality between the causes and the consequences, and it's an understandable impulse. But of course, significant events like these often do have spontaneous, small-scale causes. Believing in conspiracy theories also provides an insider's sense of being in the know. Conspiracy theorists and their followers form groups that know, quote, what really happened and how things really are. Just think of all the conspiracy theorists who go around calling people shills or sheep. So although we can understand and maybe even empathize with what drives people to believe in conspiracy theories, it would be a mistake to discount the dangerous real-life consequences of believing in them. Belief in conspiracy theories has led to physical violence and terrorism, such as the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. Many people who subscribe to conspiracy theories have a misplaced distrust or animosity toward institutions that in reality are beneficial to society. And in some cases, they can even develop a hatred toward entire groups of people. Conspiracy theories about vaccines and autism have led people to not vaccinate their children against deadly diseases. And surveys have shown that people who believe climate change to be a hoax are far less willing to reduce their carbon footprint. The more complex a problem is, the more complex the solution tends to be. So some people find comfort in falsely asserting problems to be more simple than they actually are, because it would mean that the solution is simple. If the MMR vaccine causes autism and the medical community is ignorant about it, then the solution is simple. Don't trust the medical community and don't use vaccines. It's much less palatable to consider that autism has complicated genetic causes that aren't yet fully understood, leaving us for the time being with no easy answers. Of course, you might be watching and thinking to yourself, sometimes powerful people do conspire. Sometimes the public is being lied to by the powers that be. Well, there's a difference between a healthy skepticism and habitually getting caught up in conspiracy theories. One method you might use to tell the difference is to consider how implausible it would be for a huge number of conspirators to keep everything a secret. Benjamin Franklin once wrote, quote, 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. Physicist Robert David Grimes has developed a statistically rigorous formula to determine how long it would take for a conspiracy to be exposed based on the number of people that must have been involved. Basically, the more people involved in the conspiracy, the faster a leak would have to emerge. Grimes calculated that the supposed moon landing hoax would require the involvement of about 411,000 people and would be exposed within 3.68 years. A hoax about man-made global warming would involve about 405,000 people and would be exposed within 3.7 years. So yes, some conspiracies are real, but we often find out about them through people leaking information. And we need to be reasonable about how improbable it would be for there to be no leaks whatsoever over an extended period of time from a supposed conspiracy that involves a great number of people. Another method for finding the line between rational skepticism and misguided conspiracism is to employ a critical thinking principle known as Occam's razor. Occam's razor essentially suggests that all things being equal, we should favor explanations that require the fewest assumptions. If we already have a reasonable explanation for why something happened, there's no need to invoke additional speculation. If your dog has a history of digging through your garbage and you come home and find your trash can flipped over, it's unreasonable to start hypothesizing about who broke into your house to tip over your trash can, barring some specific evidence to point you in that direction. We can also identify improbable conspiracy theories by recognizing when a conspiracy theorist is frequently and fallaciously appealing to vagueness. They try to explain something complex by giving reasons that are even more complex and nebulous, leaving endlessly branching explanations without ever arriving at hard facts or evidence. Skepticism deals with facts, proving facts, describing facts, questioning facts, while conspiracy theories are generally more concerned with attributing motives and analyzing an event in terms of its meaning and significance, and how it fits into a larger narrative. As humans, looking for patterns is in our very nature. But it's also possible to overdo it and connect dots that have no business being connected. And like I talked about, there are studies pointing to the notion that there might even be broader personality traits at play that cause people to go down this road. We have to acknowledge that we live in an unpredictable world filled with randomness, coincidences, and accidents that can have hugely profound consequences. And jumping to unsubstantiated conclusions about conspiracies is almost never going to get us closer to understanding how things really work or solving our problems.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, so some of the questions we've been asking about the Robert Mueller investigation into Trump-Russia have been, how much longer is it going to go on? We've heard claims of it being almost over, dating all the way back to 2017. We've heard from Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker last week in that very bizarre and sweaty statement that he gave that he also believes it's about to end. And the question that I increasingly have been asking is, if it's true that this investigation is almost done, why was there a morning FBI raid last week on Roger Stone? Would that really be the last thing that would happen in such a massive investigation? Or do you do that because you don't want him to destroy evidence about future possible indictees? So I don't believe that we are that close to the end of the probe. The next question that we also have to ask about the probe is, whatever happened to Donald Trump Jr. being in trouble? He said he expected to be indicted. He is potentially in trouble for a whole bunch of different stuff, including false statements made to the House Intelligence Committee for his involvement in that Trump Tower meeting. There's a whole bunch of suspicions surrounding Donald Trump Jr. We've actually heard from Congresswoman Jackie Speer that she believes Donald Trump Jr. lied to the House Intel Committee at least twice. That is something people are getting in trouble for. Michael Cohen, Roger Stone, both charged for making false statements to the House Intelligence Committee. So that's a serious thing that even within this particular investigation, people have been getting indicted for. And what we've been wondering is, well, if we heard that Donald Trump Jr. was going to get indicted months ago and it hasn't happened, what happened to that? Was that fake news? If there are no charges supposedly this, quote, late in the investigation, is it possible that there simply aren't going to be any charges against Donald Trump Jr.? We may be starting to get the answer, because it appears as though Robert Mueller is only this week going to get the official transcripts of Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, by the way, of their testimony to the House Intelligence Committee. Tomorrow, Wednesday, February 6th, the House Intelligence Committee has scheduled a vote. That vote will be on the, quote, transmission of certain committee transcripts to the Department of Justice, okay? The question as to exactly which transcripts is one that we don't have a 100% clear answer to. There are something like 70-something witnesses that have testified before the House Intelligence Committee. Any of those could be the ones that the House is voting on. But of course, Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner's transcripts are pretty close to the top of the list in terms of what might be interesting to Robert Mueller and to the Justice Department. There's also Trump's bodyguard. There's Trump's 2016 digital media director, Brad Parscale, who's running Trump's 2020 campaign. There's that mercenary billionaire who happens to be Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince. Hope Hicks, one of Trump's many White House communications directors. Russian oligarch Felix Sater testified. There's a whole bunch of interesting transcripts that could be headed over to Robert Mueller. And the ones that could be the biggest would be Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, Jr. in particular, because he has, again, said he is fearing an indictment. Now, there is this counterpoint, which is, well, these are the official transcripts, but the content of these testimonies has been made available to Robert Mueller already. So why would it really make a difference if he gets the official transcripts? And that's a very, very good question. I'm glad you asked. The reason it's important is that you need those official transcripts to attach to the indictments. With Roger Stone, in December, the official transcripts were sent over to Robert Mueller, even though he had had unofficial ones for a while. And about a month later, Roger Stone was indicted. So does this signal that Donald Trump Jr. is going to be indicted Friday, F5 Friday, as many have known, as it has become known to many people? Probably not that quickly. But we could certainly see an indictment of Donald Trump Jr. within 30 days of Robert Mueller getting those transcripts. Could be another big indictment Friday coming. It might just not be this Friday. I was actually kind of hoping for the indictment today, just hours before Donald Trump's State of the Union tonight, but clearly that isn't going to happen. Could be 30 days, could be 45 days, but it could be coming, and it could get very, very bad for Donald Trump Jr. Sooner than he might like, that's for sure. There's a prior topic on the show that we've discussed frequently, although not so much in the last year or two, and that topic is gay conversion therapy. It's also sometimes known as ex-gay therapy. It's sometimes known as reparative therapy. And the idea of ex-gay therapy is that people who believe that they are gay or have been living what the homophobic right calls a gay lifestyle, they simply need to have therapy to, quote, cure that or to change their sexual orientation. What is at issue with that is, of course, that people don't choose their sexual orientation. People do choose their religion. That certainly is self-professed. But a sexual orientation is not. So the concept of a conversion, sort of like you would convert from one religion to another, doesn't really make any sense. Often these ex-gay therapists aren't even actually therapists. That's another issue. It's often religious treatment in nature, and the term treatment is even a concern here. Often the ex-gay therapy is itself abusive, sometimes physically, sometimes sexually. And the big news now is that prominent gay conversion practitioner, I don't even want to call him a therapist, David Matheson, has come out as gay himself, which will not come as a shock to many people in the audience. He put up a statement on his Facebook page a few days ago where he said, "Not that I would excuse myself, but any shortcomings I had as a therapist came from too narrow a view of what emotionally healthy can look like. They came from my own homophobia and narrow-mindedness. I am truly sorry for those flaws and the harm they have surely caused some people, and I'm sorry for the confusion and pain my choice may be causing others." He's even framing his own coming out as gay as a choice, which I guess the decision to publicly state that he's gay is a choice. But of course, being gay is not a choice. And so there are multiple tragedies here. One tragedy is that he was married to a woman for 34 years. He ruined people's lives with his homophobia and so-called therapy, and he is gay himself. That's a tragedy for everyone involved. It's a tragedy he couldn't live his life as the person he truly is. It's a tragedy that he ruined so many people's lives with his so-called conversion therapy. Now, he's also a Mormon, and he blames a lot of the homophobia, his homophobia, on the Mormon church. Now, that I believe the Mormon church is homophobic, but blaming it just on the church gets him out of criticism that he still deserves. Not all Mormons are ex-gay therapists. That is still something that he chose to do. So it's great that he came out, but then the biggest tragedy at the bottom of this is that he still seems to think that this so-called ex-gay therapy is legitimate, because he also added in his Facebook statement about this, "What you can take from this is that my time in a straight marriage and in the ex-gay world was genuine and sincere and a rich blessing to me. I remember most of it with fondness and gratitude for the joy and growth it caused in me and many others." He's still pretending or believes that ex-gay therapy is legitimate and good, and that it caused joy and growth for the people that he interacted with as an ex-gay therapist. So this is, I guess it's good in a sense that he can now live as the person he is. It seems as though he's getting out of ex-gay therapy, but he still is touting the idea that it's a good thing. Fortunately, if we want to find like a silver lining in this entire thing, ex-gay therapy, reparative therapy, has been banned for minors in 15 states. In 15 states, including some of the highest population ones like California and Illinois and New York, even if the parents want to send the kid to ex-gay therapy, it's illegal to send minors to it. Now, are churches finding ways to get around this? Are the religiously affiliated ex-gay therapists figuring out ways to get around this? Yes, of course they are. But strictly speaking, it's still a success. The bad part is that it's unfortunately still legal for adults everywhere and for children in 35 states. So progress has been made, not nearly enough. And, you know, every time the entire homophobic people are actually gay thing comes up, it's important to just remind everybody that most people who are homophobic are not gay, right? And it actually doesn't even really matter if they are. Homophobia is something we can activate and argue against, regardless of whether the people who are homophobic are doing it because they are resenting and trying to repress their own sexuality, or because they just think, hey, the Bible says I should be homophobic, so I am. Of course, there are some people who are using their homophobia as a way to hide their homosexuality. Of course, that happens. It's not most people, and I think that sometimes the pro-LGBT rights groups will go a little far with the memes and the jokes about everybody who's homophobic actually being gay. I don't think we really gained that much from it, but certainly there's no doubt that there have been dozens of prominent homophobes who were gay or bisexual. So much more work to be done. 15 states have at least done something good here. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail commenting on yesterday's show. I suggested that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro might flee, if indeed he decides to flee. He might flee to Bolivia, although it's unclear, maybe to Cuba, although it's not clear Cuba would want him because of what that would mean for Cuba-U.S. relations, maybe to Nicaragua. Here's a caller who suggested a different option for Nicolas Maduro.
Hi, David. My name's Carlo. I'm calling in to discuss the video that you recently uploaded about the Venezuelan president, Maduro, and speculating as to where he might flee should the military turn against him. And I read somewhere that Xi Jinping, the president of China, is backing him over the interim president. So is it possible that he may flee to China? What are your thoughts? Thanks. Bye.
I don't think so. There are also, it's not just who would have him. There's also the question of cultural issues. And as someone myself who was born in Argentina, if I was presented with the option of safe haven in another Spanish-speaking country like Nicaragua or Cuba or Bolivia versus China, even if I thought maybe economically I would be better off in China, I don't know. It would be very difficult to imagine going to a country where I don't speak the language and I'm of a completely different culture than another country in Latin America. So I don't see that as particularly likely. And quite frankly, I would imagine Nicolas Maduro ends up in Russia before I would imagine that he ends up in China. But the caller is not wrong about the Chinese president's view on what's going on in Venezuela. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Get instant access to it by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. We will talk about the sometimes taboo topic of athletes who were born biologically male participating in female athletic competitions. We will talk about that and much more on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.